Kennedy Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This debate on the Veterans Support Bill is beginning to wind down, but not the commitment of this Parliament to its objective and its principles. I rise just to reaffirm the Green Party's support for this bill. We will see it in Select Committee. It has been a while in coming, 3.5 years since it was reported back to the House, but as the Minister himself said, it's important to get it right. And I assure the Minister that the Green Party will work constructively with him to that end. It's always an interesting characteristic of debates and bills pertaining to national security and veteran sacrifice that brings out a personal commitment and personal recollections on the part of members of Parliament. We've heard the very moving speech from Melissa Lee, and I think there is no individual member of Parliament here who is without some form of personal relationship to sacrifice in this country. Certainly, I had an uncle whom I never met who fell in Egypt during World War II. My father-in-law served in the UK in the NZRAF, stationed over at a RAF base, who died just 3 years ago, leaving his widow, my mother-in-law, who is still with us but has very, very, very little time left with us. We certainly endorse the principles in this bill. I think they're sufficient for the purpose: community responsibility, fair entitlement, equal treatment, and beneficial approach. And I think with those that we apply into practical manifestation, we will indeed get this right. Just to conclude on a philosophical note, my colleague Jan Logie identified the fourth principle in the Green Charter, which is non-violence, which effectively means that conflict needs to be settled in a non-violent way. And for that to happen, you basically need a mechanism, I think, of peace, a fabric of peace. And I think it is not so much turning around or presuming to turn around human behaviour. If we wish to avoid the nightmare of fallen loved ones and people returning as veterans with physical and psychological scars, then we need to develop with greater determination and insight than we have even in the last half century, a fabric for peace. And I personally, in fact, it was Melissa Lee who, on behalf of herself and her country, men and women, referred to the United Nations coming to the aid of South Korea at the time, and I would endorse that. The UN actually, it was probably the clearest case of the United Nations rising to the challenge in terms of aggression and effectively making this the critical contribution to restoring peace. Coming out of that, however, the fabric for peace that you need, and which is there in the agenda for peace, the United Nations is developing this slowly, agonizingly, but it is getting there. Preventive diplomacy, Pacific settlement, conflict resolution, peacekeeping, and peacemaking. And that requires, especially the last one, peacemaking, requires the legitimate use of force. The pathway to a world without war is the strengthening of international law and the legitimate use of force. A world without force will require a change of human nature. But a world without war simply requires a change in human principles and institutions. And I don't think it is in any way impossible or naive or unrealistic to look for a world without war, while fully recognizing that human nature does not need to change. We just need to be more insightful, more determined to get it right. Thank you.
I call the Honourable Member Mike